Good morning. We are with Mayor Lucy Vinnis this morning, and we are going to talk to Lucy a little bit about her re-election campaign. So she is up for re-election for mayor this upcoming year. And since we have you, after we chat about your campaign and your platform and some of the things that you care about, we are gonna probably have a handful of questions just about the current situation and what's going on, and the role that you're playing in this, and be able to, if folks have any questions, we can get those answered for them as well. So in the chat box here to the side, we'll allow folks who are on the meeting to chime in. For those following on Facebook Live, this is our normal Chamber Local Government Affairs Council meeting. We have a committee of Chamber members who help us determine policy positions on behalf of the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, and ensuring that we have business-friendly candidates who are aligned with some of the big issues that our chamber and our business community care about, is a priority for our chamber. So over the next week and a half, we're going to have interviews and candidate forums with the folks who are running for the offices that are up for re-election right now. So we're kicking it off with Mayor Lucy Vinnis, and we have a handful of questions for her. And I am going to go ahead and get started by just letting you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office, Mayor.
Well, I'm running for office because I've started work in my first term in office that I want to carry through for a second term. When I ran for office, in 2016, I had a few key priorities: climate change, housing, homelessness, economic development, and social justice. And we've made a lot of progress on that, actually, with great thanks to the Chamber, who stepped in on really pretty much all of those issues to work with us. So we're revising our climate action plan to enable the community to move forward on specific strategies to address climate change. We have, with support from the Chamber, really passed a construction excise tax that for the first time enables us to build a local revenue stream to build more of the housing that we need in our community. We have spent the city and county together a couple of years developing a strategic plan around homelessness that we call the TAC report, 10 recommendations. And I will say that all that groundwork that we did on the TAC report and those 10 recommendations actually has put us in very good shape in terms of addressing this immediate crisis with coronavirus. All those relationships and strategies were built. And we've been working hard on economic development, building the continued investment in our downtown on the high-speed fiber and the number of tech and tech-related industries that are there, the growing investment in housing and community downtown and the riverfront development. So we're beginning to be that community that we've always wanted to be, with a vibrant downtown core, plenty of businesses there, and increasingly number of people living there. And I've focused on social justice issues, which have the equity challenges are enormous and will be even larger as a result of this coronavirus pandemic. So all of those things are in place, and I am eager to take those critical frameworks that we've developed in the last 3.5 years and see those changes actually happen on the ground, actually see us make those critical steps on climate, see us invest that revenue from the construction excise tax, see that translate into more housing in our community, see us stabilize more people through implementation of those plans. And the economic development seemed like we were just on a steady growth curve. Now we have a crisis that challenges that, and I really want to be there working closely with our partners and helping us to pull out of this and see it maybe as an opportunity to do some things differently, look at it differently, but certainly invest in our community. So eager just to continue doing the work. I enjoy being mayor. I enjoy working with the community, and eager to have another 4 years.
Thank you. Mayor, what do you think is the most important aspect of being mayor?
I think an ability to communicate, which means not just speaking, but also listening. The mayor is really a bridge. The mayor is a bridge between the council and the staff, and the mayor is a bridge between the city government and the community. And so that people have to walk both ways on that bridge. I have to be able to understand issues, hear what people are saying, and be responsive to what people are saying.
What do you think best qualifies you for being in this role?
I think I have a capacity to listen and to communicate, and I carry with me a kind of a deep curiosity about what people will say and what ideas they might bring forward, and a willingness to take the time to walk our way through some of the possible solutions. And now, one of the things I'll say is, as with any big job, the first couple of years in a big job, you just figure out how to do the job. Mm-hmm. And what I look forward to is now I actually get this job, and I would like to have another 4 years where the whole 4 years, I really sort of understand the role. The role of a mayor is partly art form. It's not the authority and influence of the mayor is in some way very quiet. It's in building those relationships. It's in building some understanding. It's not, I don't overtly by city charter do not actually have a lot of power. So it's all in that relationships, and it takes time.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's a steep learning curve for this position.
Right.
What do you believe is the biggest challenge currently facing Eugene? And as mayor, what do you propose? How do you propose we address it?
Well, I think if we look at those top issues that I've identified: climate, housing, homelessness, economic development, social justice, I actually think that the overriding issue is one of equity. Is how do we address all of those issues, enabling people to participate fully in our community and benefit fully from the investments we make as a community. It would be very easy, especially at a time like this when we're in a crisis phase, it would be very easy to we see this at the federal level, right? The challenge of the stimulus package, is it just benefiting, the big guys, or is everybody getting an opportunity to grow? And as we look at what both the human suffering and the economic dislocation that we're facing right now because of the coronavirus, I think that should be high on our list of how are we enabling our small businesses, how are we enabling our nonprofits to function, how are we enabling people to just kind of stabilize their lives. And so, I think our investments as a city, we look at those investments in that deep infrastructure, and as we look at that, equity is going to be a big piece of that if we're going to lift ourselves back up.
Absolutely. What approach do you take to ensure that you fully understand the impacts of your decisions on members of the community?
I just try to do my homework. I really try to do my homework. I try to understand the issue as well as I can, and I try to talk to people as much as I can to understand what their perspectives are. And at the end of the day, we actually have a good city staff. So at the end of the day, I trust them. I mean, I learn from them. I ask them the questions. I try to create enough space in council for really a good conversation. And the end of the day, I have to trust the people who really have an in-depth knowledge. The mayor is kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. You have to be able to jump from issue to issue, a wide array of issues. I can't be an expert in all of those, so I need to trust people.
Good. How do you differentiate or prioritize community decisions versus decisions specific to individual interests?
Well, that is always challenging because, I spend my days talking to people who always have a specific interest, right? They have a specific goal in mind or a specific grievance. So that, I think, is the reason to be very intentional about how many people you talk to and who you're talking to. And I will say in my second term that I would like to get to a place where I'm even more intentional about that than I was in my first term, trying even more, in a more focused way, to identify those sort of groups, sectors within our community that I don't hear from enough, and actually reach out to do those. And Brittany, you and I were part of a conversation last night, and I think these weekly conversations with local business people is part of that. I'm seeing that as a good model for me going forward, is to identify some of those smaller groups and just intentionally have regular meetings with them. We think about our communities of color and often the challenge of making sure those communities are represented in our conversations. And you know, there's so many people who come at me wanting my attention. And at some point, I think I need to take a breath and go, okay, wait a second, these are all the people coming at me. Who's not coming at me that I really need to talk to?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Ensuring a healthy economy is important, obviously, for long-term stability and sustainability. It keeps people employed, which supports the tax base that we rely on to deliver so many of those services in our community. In your opinion, what's the best way that we can promote economic development in Eugene, and what role does the mayor play in that?
Well, the way I look at the city's work is that the city's job is to create a landscape in which businesses can thrive. We have to create a landscape in which we provide the infrastructure. So we provide the transportation systems, we provide the communication systems that the city needs to function well. We provide the public safety systems. We create that landscape. And I think one of the things we have learned with our downtown is it's not just enough to create that landscape. We actually also have to nurture that environment. We have to manage that environment. And I think we learned that the hard way of thinking we could just, you know, do whatever we do with the roads downtown, open them, close them, and then step back and wait for the business community to thrive. And I think what we have learned the hard way is that's not actually enough. Mm-hmm. And so it is around creating those relationships. And really, as we, you know, recover from this coronavirus crisis, those relationships are going to be so essential to understand what really works and what doesn't work. I think it'd be very easy for us to go off on a tangent and think, even looking at the loan program and thinking about how that's the emergency loans, thinking about how that's working, you know, is first come, first serve the best way to do a program like that. I mean, one of the business people suggested that, and I think, you know, it was demonstrated that maybe we should think about how we're going to balance that out. So I think going forward, it's that we create the basic structure, but then we really have to kind of foster and nurture what happens within that landscape.
Absolutely. So we all know that Eugene is extremely diverse in all kinds of different ways. What are some of the shared values that you see between different members and sections of our community?
You know, I think that the shared, I mean, first of all, the shared value is that we all love this landscape, right? We all chose, you know, people who grew up here and stayed here, people who chose to move here. We moved here because we loved the scale of the city. We love the landscape of the city. We want to live here. And there are certainly other communities where people might make more money, or they might have access to, you know, a bigger airport or whatever, but we love the scale of this community and we want to invest in it. I think it's interesting as I'm not canvassing these days because of coronavirus, but when you visit different neighborhoods in this community, everybody loves their neighborhoods. They talk with such pride and commitment to the quality of life in their neighborhoods, and that gives us an incredible strength. I also think, and we are certainly seeing this play out, is that people talk about this as if it is in some way a black mark on our character that we have over 3,000 nonprofits in this community. But actually what we're seeing now is, in a crisis like this, those 3,000 nonprofits have their fingers in many different areas and can address many different needs. And when we need people to mobilize, they mobilize in this community. People care about children, they care about seniors, they care about the homeless, they care about the environment, they care about water quality, they care about air. I mean, it's, you know, people are out there actually caring and acting on that commitment, and that's an incredible strength.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously with that diverse population, we have a lot of times values that are in opposition to each other as well. And I can imagine, and I don't envy sometimes how difficult of a position that puts policymakers in. How do you operate in that environment, and how do you define bold leadership?
Well, this is always the delicate place of how much do you, and we do see this in our council conversations, how much do you lead the public and how much does the public lead you as a leader? And there's a fine line. It's not, and on any given issue, that line is different. So for me, when it's a question of values, when it's a question of equity and social justice or environmental protection, I'm very clear about those values. Those are lifelong values. So I feel very clear about where I'm landing usually on an issue because I carry those values. But we have to be able to bring people along. So as a mayor and as the presiding officer of the council, we can't be so far ahead of the public that they just don't follow us, right? We can't be so far ahead that they just dig their heels in and say, I'm going to vote down. I'm going to write an initiative, right? I'm going to protest this at the ballot. This is outrageous. You want policies to be able to move forward. So at some point there has to be some give and take, and I think we experienced that with the construction excise tax, right? We came out as a community really not seeing it the same way. I think at the end of the day, council wasn't universally content with it. It was a compromise, but we needed to come to that compromise in order to take the next step forward. And so I think bold leadership is not necessarily pushing people where they don't want to go. Bold leadership is enabling to take a step that they might be not totally convinced of, but they're going to follow you because you've done the homework. You have the credibility that they're going to trust you. Okay, I might not love this, but I'll go there.
Thank you. So we have a couple folks from LGAC who are on this chat who have listed some questions in the chat panel. At this point, we'll open it up to anybody else who might have questions. So feel free to list those in there. I would love for you to type them out, but we're going to try this. I'm going to allow Carol to talk and see if she can, if this works. I've unmuted you, Carol. So if you want to ask her a question, ask your question to Mayor Vinnis.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was having trouble with the microphone last week, so I think I've got it all figured out. Good morning, Mayor Vinnis. Thank you for joining us in this Zoom. I don't know if I should apologize that my question isn't about the current events, but I personally really...
Oops, I lost you.
And so I just wanted to ask a question with respect to housing as we look forward to the other side of this and getting back to focusing on the business of the city. I'm curious what other tools you and the city are looking at to ease the path to development of housing. That's still my focus in my consulting business. I really advocate and just love housing of all levels. So one of the easiest things in my mind is we've talked about deferring SDCs until issuance of occupancy permit. I have a housing project whose SDCs are going to be right around $2 million, and that's a question in their mind. Why can't that be deferred until occupancy instead of being paid up front? That seems like low-hanging fruit. I don't know if you can talk about any progress the council has had in those discussions, or any other strategies you might have for easing the path to housing.
Right. So I can address that in the broad sweep and maybe not with the specificity that you would be looking for, but I'll dive in.
Sure.
So as you know, we went through the housing strategies process and identified this broad sweep, 80 possible ways in which we could create more affordable, increase the availability of more affordable housing. And adjusting SDCs are high on the list. And of course, we we're right in the middle of that conversation with the Parks and Rec SDCs. We've just been through the conversation with the transportation SDCs, and the methodology has been to look at it and look at where do we want to make it easier to build the housing that we want and the denser housing. And so the methodology has been to reduce or remove the SDC charges in, for example, in transportation with ADUs if they're close to transportation corridors. We're looking at the same kind of formula with the Parks and Rec SDCs of reducing those in order to incentivize. I do think, to dive into the current situation, that when council reconvenes in April and we pick back up on some of these issues, we will have to be looking at the hit that the economy has taken through coronavirus and consider whether this is really the time to even talk about any kind of fee increase. So I would expect that to be pretty top of mind for council, and certainly for the city manager. She's developing the budget that we need to recover from this crisis. We do need to build more housing, and we need to take a second look at where we're doing that with fee increases.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor, it looks like your camera.
Oh, let me fix it. Let me see. I'm getting messages that I can't. How's that? We're back.
Yeah.
There we go. I don't know why it went off, but.
That's okay. All right. I'm going to find Ralph Parshall has the next question here. Let me turn his mic on. Let's see, this is a new kind of feature that I'm trying to use here. So, Ralph. All right. Are you there, Ralph? Do you want to ask your question? Oh, are you there? All right, we'll read his question. So how important is a united city council in major votes for our community, and how do you create those votes as mayor?
Well, that's the art form. So my goal is never to have to break a tie, of course. I would always like the council to be able to more or less fall in line on any particular vote. It's stronger, it's a better message to the public. It's better for council not to feel that divided. That said, we're restricted really by public meetings law around sort of polling council, right? Vote checking. So I can check in with council on, and I will often do this, I'll call councilors and check in on them. Do they have all the information they need going into the meeting? And if a meeting is time sensitive, I'll urge them to get their questions into staff early so they go fully informed. I'll get a sense of what their questions or concerns might be so that I can be sure staff is prepared to answer those questions. So I try to do it by enabling counselors to be in a position to make the best decision possible because they've had a chance to do their homework, to talk things through with staff. And that's my role. I can't, I'm not in the business of telling council how to do things. My job is to make sure that they're in the best position to do it well themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I have Phil Barnhart with the next question. Phil, I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be. Are you there, Phil?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Phil, can you tell us who you are, who you're with, and then ask your question?
Okay. My name is Phil Barnhart. I'm a recovering politician who also has been organizing the Electric Vehicle Association, which is attempting to help people transition to electric vehicles away from polluting gas guzzlers. My question is really an old issue from my prior world, and that is, under the current circumstances, with the need to self-quarantine and social distance and so forth, how does one campaign for public office? The primary is likely to be the race, for the mayor, and yet there may not be much time for you to go press the flesh.
Right.
What do you do?
Right. So, I will say that a decade ago, without some of these tools, it would have really been a hopeless process. So what I am doing is I'm continuing to make lots of phone calls. My campaign is doing things like this. So we're doing Facebook, a live town hall on Facebook this afternoon. I'm doing one with Matt Keating. I did one last week with Jamie McLeod Skinner. So every Friday afternoon, I'm doing a live town hall on Facebook. So that enables people to ask, hear a little presentation and ask some questions. So we'll do a lot of social media. We'll do some radio advertising. We'll do mailings. We just have to do it in other ways. But social media, thankfully, gives me a way to be a face and not just a voice.
What's the name of the Facebook page?
Excuse me. Oh, so re-elect Lucy Vinnis. Re-elect Mayor Lucy Vinnis.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. All right, we have Barbie Walker next. I'm gonna enable you to talk, Barbie, and allow you to ask your question. You can tell us who you are and who you're with.
Okay, let's see here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Barbie Walker, owner of 2 restaurants in town and University District Business Association, president of the board. And the question I have is kind of a current events one. As small businesses are about to be turned down for insurance claims for the interruption of business via the civil authority and obviously via COVID-19, what advocacy for income is being done at a local level to help these businesses get through this time of no income? The ones that are being forced to be closed, they're the backbone that creates funds for things like public safety tax, LTD, local charities, nonprofits, little leagues. Without these businesses making this income, either do these things.
Right. So, our first step out was to create this emergency loan fund with the county and with the city of Springfield, and clearly wasn't robust enough because the line was very long and the dollars were not enough. So we'll look at how we create a more robust local stream. We're counting on the state legislature to step up and provide some opportunities, and the stimulus package at the federal level will bring pretty significant dollars to the state of Oregon. So we're looking at all 3 levels of creating some stimulus. And we have Brittany and I were again part of a meeting last night. The city staffer is putting together our own proposed recovery plan. And so the first ideas of that are going to come out next week for the city. So there'll be some more specifics coming.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbie, I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to let you know that the Eugene Chamber is part of a larger coalition of chambers across the country that are working on that business insurance issue. So we have about 70 chamber CEOs who were on a call yesterday working on kind of a plan of action to touch base with insurance commissioners across the country and then move it up to the federal government in regards to the business interruption insurance. So stay tuned on that. We're working that advocacy side at the state and federal levels. So just letting you know.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brittany.
Yeah, of course. All right. So we have John Brown and then John Barofsky in the queue. I'm gonna let's see. John Brown, I'm gonna find you here and enable you to ask your question. All right, John, can you hear us? Are you there to ask your question?
I can, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Well, welcome, Mayor Vinnis, and thank you for joining this organization. I jump in and out every once in a while. So on the buildable lands inventory that Carol mentioned earlier, I know that especially in South Eugene, that land has been there since the urban growth boundary was created. There's a lot of it considered, quote, buildable by city staff because the rules state that you don't have to consider the cost to develop land. And so it's extremely expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars per lot to develop in that area. So it meets the criteria when you say we have buildable land, but when you can't consider the financial feasibility of doing so, it's really not buildable. Because the analogy I always use is I can build a home in the middle of the ocean if cost isn't relevant. So how do you rectify that, what I call a disparity or discrepancy in the system, where we're not allowed to consider the cost to develop things, and so it's physically developable, anything is, but it's really not functionally or economical. How are you going to address that or rectify it?
I guess I'll say two things. One is that this is a detailed question that I don't have a specific answer for, and I would, be looking to people like you, but also like our staff to sort of address that question. The second piece is that I'm assuming that some of the work on clear and objective standards, some of the other work, and as we do the urban reserves research and data collection, that there could be a way of factoring in that cost of development. If our goal is to build more housing that people can afford, that then we look at certain pieces of land. If we're looking at those very expensive pieces, that's land for very expensive houses, right? That's not land that is going to be our more affordable housing. So that's a really good kind of specific lens for me to look at and ask about. And I don't exactly know how they would do that, but I would think that, like anything else, you can evaluate this land fits this, helps us address this specific need for a kind of housing, and this land, meets another need. It still makes it buildable. It just means it's buildable for very expensive housing.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the answer.
Thanks, John. We're gonna go with John Barofsky next. I'm gonna turn your mic on, John. Where are you? All right, are you there, John Barofsky?
I am here, thank you. Excuse me. John Brown, I think I can address your question a little bit. A lot of that has to do with the state land use codes, unfortunately. So it might be advocating to our legislatures for some sort of change, but that wasn't my question. I just know it, I'm sorry. So Lucy, the question that I have, and it's fairly difficult for you to do as a mayor, but you mentioned the budget committee. The budget is going to be put forward here in the next month or two. It's a political season, and it's going to be, in my opinion, it's going to be easy for people to try and address very current things using monies that might be better off used in the long term. And being able to look long term at this year's budget, I think, is going to be very important, because it'll be real easy to say, let's take $1 million out of reserves for this, let's take $1 million out of reserves for that. And knowing that this 1 year's budget cycle can't fix this problem.
Right.
But it can do some things to address it, I think. But it's going to be important for you as a leader, even though you don't sit on the budget committee, you do have a bully pulpit, and to be able to make sure that that is heard, that we're not going to be able to fix this problem out of the city of Eugene's reserve for revenue shortfall.
Yeah, I agree. I've actually already had this conversation earlier this week with the city manager and the assistant city manager about, as we look at it, that what we really need is a recovery plan. And so we, the immediate needs are first responders, right? It's this sort of, there's sort of that acute crisis need. We are going to have long-term recovery plans. And so I do think that I would expect the conversation in the budget committee and in council, and I would continue to frame it that way, that we have to look at this as iterative steps. What we do in the acute phase doesn't, and I think the city manager is already thinking this way, what we do now should not foreclose critical needs that we're going to have a year from now or 2 years from now or 3 years from now as we rebuild. And so, yeah, I think there's a sequence and there's a scale, and there are the things that are immediate needs versus the long-term needs. So I do think I agree with you. I think that's a fundamental part of this year's budget conversation, that we not lose our way in that build. And so, yeah, I think there's a sequence and there's a scale, and there are the things that are immediate needs versus the long-term needs. So I do think I agree with you. I think that's a fundamental part of this year's budget conversation, that we not lose our way in that build. And so, yeah, I think there's a sequence and there's a scale, and there are the things that are immediate needs versus the long-term needs. So I do think I agree with you. I think that's a fundamental part of this year's budget conversation, that we not lose our way in that build. And so, yeah, I think there's a sequence and there's a scale, and there's why is this recording over and over again versus the long-term needs? So I do think I agree with you. I think it's going over and over again. I don't know how to stop that. Lose our way in that build. And so, yeah, I think there's a sequence. Okay.
Are you there?
Yeah, it just went over and over and over again.
Thought you were really just trying to reiterate that point.
No, and then when we got to the third time, it's like, wait a second.
Hold on. I don't think she's trying to do
that. What happened? I didn't touch anything. It just did it.
Oh, that's too funny.
Oh.
Thank you. Thanks, John. So we have, that's kind of the end of the list that I have right now. So if other folks have questions, if you're watching on Facebook Live and you guys have questions, feel free to pop those on. Mayor, I do have a couple more that I'd like to chat a little bit about too. So taking you off the mic there, John. So, before the current events, and the obvious crisis that's created for a lot of businesses in our community, one of the biggest business issues that we were hearing on a constant kind of repetitive tone was the public safety issues in our community. And there's folks who have criticized you, to be frank, in the response to that as mayor. You addressed a little bit earlier that, the mayor has, in our form of government, has a little bit less kind of influence on some of those day-to-day activities. But I want to know what are you going to do as mayor about the public safety, I would say, crisis in our community that is really impacting businesses' ability to thrive and succeed in our community?
Yeah, I do think that is the big challenge that we face. And it is alarming to me right now that we have businesses closed down downtown, and that then those businesses feel very exposed and vulnerable to vandalism and graffiti, and worries me deeply. I know that it worries the chief and the city manager. So I think it's a question of how we expend our resources, and where we deploy officers, where we have more eyes on the street. The reason for passing the community safety initiative payroll tax was in order to give us a more robust revenue stream, so that we could have more eyes on the street. I do think that's part of it. I think we're also struggling with our court system, which is these sort of lower level misdemeanor crimes. It's the challenge is, as Eugene Wake Up has pointed out, the challenge is, how do you hold these people accountable for these smaller crimes? And we don't have a robust system for that. Our jail beds are reserved for people who are violent criminals, a danger to themselves and others, and they're not really there to hold people who have created acts of vandalism or graffiti. That has been the role of the community court. So I will say that I have confidence in that community safety initiative and that plan, and I have confidence in the chief to execute that plan. And I think the test of our confidence in that actually is right now, before we haven't even fully funded that plan. It's not really rolling, but we have to get from here to there. And we have to make that some kind of progress and improvement on the landscape between now and when we really have those more robust services. So I really, based on that conversation last night, it worries me deeply. So I will be having those conversations with the city manager and the chief about how do we make this safer in the short term before we even get to that more robust revenue stream and larger services. So I agree, it's very worrisome.
What will success look like to you for that payroll tax? We, the chamber, it was a really big deal for our members, for our board to come out in support of that measure. And it was a hard decision. I think that the taxing landscape on local businesses right now is, after this crisis, it very likely will be at a breaking point. But before that, I think it was pretty close to it. And so to support that measure, it was a huge, I think, statement from the business community to say that the public safety crisis is so, I think, important and relevant right now that they were willing to put their money where their mouth is, to say. But we were big advocates that if this doesn't work in 7 years, that the public gets to vote and say yes or no on continuing this tax. So in your opinion, what does success look like? And, 4 years down the road, if you do remain in this position, what will you have to see to be able to campaign in support of continuing that?
Success will have to look like and sound like the business community saying, oh, that's a good investment, right? It's the landscape is safer. My business is able to function effectively. My customers feel safe. I don't feel under siege from whatever is happening on the streets. That's what success looks like, is that people feel that we have created a safe and predictable landscape for them. And I think that kick-out clause at year 7, that was the point. If we don't succeed, we don't want to throw good money after bad. So we need to have the outcomes we're looking for, which is that, faster response, greater accountability, and good investment in prevention that lowers the need.
Good. What do you know now that you didn't know 4 years ago? What opinions did you have going into this that have maybe changed just based on your experience being in this role?
I think that so there's a sort of a lighthearted response and a serious response. And the lighthearted response is that that I have discovered really how enjoyable the work is, that it's actually fun to be the mayor. And it's fun because I do get to meet different people all the time, and all of the people I talk to are passionate about our community. They want it to be better, and that's just, it's fun to talk to people. People have creative ideas. I enjoy all of that. So I don't think going into it you fully realize, and I think from the outside, people who are not in this role, you don't really realize, like, that's the pleasure of the job, is kind of meeting all those people and getting all that creative juice and fire and energy from them. What I've learned in the job is how subtle the work really is, and how much the work is really hearing people carefully and taking some time, and I think to begin to understand the power of the role, which I would say in the first couple of years, there were moments at which I didn't really recognize that I had a moment where I could have perhaps stepped in and influenced the conversation differently. You just sort of have to figure it out and understand those relationships. And so my expectation of myself is that coming into a second term, that I will understand those moments when I really could change the dialogue, change the direction of a conversation or a process for the better, that maybe I didn't recognize, you know, in the first couple of years in office. So that's the learning curve for me, is figuring that out. And, you know, it's not a linear path.
This will be a two-part question, so I'll give you the ability to answer both ways, but what's your biggest regret from your first term in office, or something that you wish you could have changed?
Well, I think there were moments in council where things didn't go the way I really wanted them to go, and so one of the ones that really sort of created a crisis, I ended up calling an emergency council meeting, was a year ago, well, a year and a half ago, when we needed to create funds in order for the Highway 99 homeless encampment to continue and support that. And council balked at the last minute around it and didn't vote. And suddenly we were going into the cold season, and they had voted something down that they really needed to support. And it was a moment in which we were going into the winter. We actually needed those funds. We needed council to appropriate those funds. And I had not recognized that we were literally on thin ice. It didn't occur to me that council would have sort of not seen that, what the issue was. So I had to circle back and have an emergency session later in December just to make sure that council had a chance to revisit that and vote for it. So that's a learning curve, right? I didn't see it coming. I didn't see their apprehension. I didn't see what might be influencing them. And so that's when I talk about my needing to really check in with counselors on decisions. Do they have everything they need? Because I think I just didn't recognize what pieces of information they were missing to make that decision.
Yeah. What are you most proud of?
I actually am, I'm proud of a lot of things. I am very proud of the construction excise tax work. That was a lot of work by Chamber and Better Housing Together and council. And it was, you know, a huge investment in time, and it was a hard one to pull off. And I'm proud that we did that as a community. Very proud of that. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done, bringing ourselves to this point with implementing the recommendations of the TAC report. I took office saying that I would champion a creation of a permanent shelter for the homeless, but that we wouldn't do it alone as a city. We would do it with the county, and we're working more closely than ever before with the county. And it has positioned us now to be very responsive in this immediate crisis. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm proud of the climate work. We still have a lot of work to do. It's a heavy lift, but it's been iterative, it's been detailed, it's been data-based, and it's been responsive to public comment. So I think, again, that's something to be very proud of.
Question from Janine Parisi of eWeb. She says, do you see any silver lining post this current crisis? She suggests perhaps a different configuration of City Hall as more people are learning how to work from home.
I do. I hope for a silver lining in this. I think, we will have to walk through all of our ongoing council policy decisions and investments, and we'll have to look at them through a different lens. So this relates back to John Barofsky's question about the sort of short-term versus the long-term budget look. I think we'll have to look at it that way. I am hopeful that as we think about our recovery process, that we really will think about those investments that would make our community better, that we'll look at, I look at it as our Marshall Plan. Like, how do we say, all right, we've taken this big hit. We need to invest in our public transportation, active transportation. We need to invest in our housing. We need to be responsive to the challenges of climate change. How do we knit those things together in a strategic plan that actually solves some of the issues that we have and that moves us forward? And we have that opportunity, I think, to look at our priorities again, say what's the most important. And and I think we're all learning different skills about how we meet. I think just to talk about public forum in City Hall and the need for a meeting place. We'll be testing that out, right? The council comes back on April 8th, and we'll have to do it in this kind of format online. So how is that going to work for a public forum? How do we reach out to communities that maybe don't have a laptop or a way to really phone in their questions? So yeah, I think we'll learn some things about how to do our work, and it may change a lot of decisions.
Yeah. So question from Ralph Parshall, who's the general manager at Mercedes-Benz. Do you believe that a stronger stance needs to be taken with the present lawless issues downtown from you and the council?
Well, yes and no. I mean, that is why I'm really referring to the community safety initiative, because I think we have a strategy for addressing community safety that has been well researched and thought out and established. And I'm not sure what a stronger stance would be without those investments, because the stronger stance requires more eyes on the street. So that's investment in police. A stronger stance requires opening a second municipal court so that we can hear those cases. That's part of the initiative. A stronger stance requires a better process for accountability. That's part of the initiative. So I think, I think what we're just recognizing is that we have the pressure building up in our public safety stresses, and we have the solutions, but the solutions aren't fully in play yet. And so when people ask for a stronger stance, I'm not sure outside of the community safety initiative what people are thinking is missing that we're not proposing to invest in.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's definitely folks who see some of the decisions that council made in the last year, like on the ordinance to prohibit folks from handing money outside of their car windows, or how council kind of backpedaled on a couple of the ordinances that were attempted downtown, like the smoking ban or the dog safety zone, things like that. I think that from some people's perspective, it feels like we try something and then we backpedal on it, and then what actually gets put in place is far less effective than what it could have been if we would have just taken a strong stance on some of these things.
Yeah, I hear that. I think we do have a pattern of initiating things as pilot programs, and then if they don't seem to be as effective, we withdraw them. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that that is frustrating and does mean that people feel like it's not a consistent landscape. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we don't want to continue to invest in policies that don't seem to be producing outcomes just because that's the policy we passed. So, I think it's challenging. And I think we're trying to get the most bang for the buck because resources are limited. So we are trying to be conscientious about how we use our police and what are we asking them to do. And so, circling back on just the lawlessness and accountability, we want our police to be empowered to address criminal acts at all levels, right? Those vandals and misdemeanors as well as the more violent crimes. We want them to act at all levels. We don't want them to spend time on what I would consider nuisance crimes, which are the kinds of crimes that we tend to send through our community court. So that's the balancing act. I think that's what we bumped up against with the dogs, and I think we're struggling with the smoking. Where can you smoke? Where can you not smoke? It's it's a little confusing. We really want to be spending time doing that as opposed to doing something that's creates a greater public safety concern. So yeah, it's not perfect. I agree, it's not perfect. It's iterative. I understand the frustration with it. I would say on public safety, as with many other things, if money were no issue and we were able to just hire all the people we needed to do and do all the things, that we would address a lot of these issues, right? If we had adequate addiction and mental health services, we would address a lot of these pieces. I mean, there are just so many factors in all of this. And we're trying to be judicious about where we put the money. And yeah, we have a project that doesn't work, we don't want to stay with it.
So a question somewhat along those lines. So at the center of the homeless lawless issue is addiction. What do you think of the Eugene Mission's invitation to have a social service agencies go on their property free of charge to work with these folks in coordinated effort to address the root cause? How are you using your office to greater leverage the coordination of agencies like that?
That's a really great question, and it's actually a couple of questions, because the addiction question is really a separate issue. So the mission, I think it's very compelling. They do have capacity to do a lot of work. They are not, however, interested in providing addiction services there, because they're not wanting their population to have to deal with sort of a low barrier setting in which people are coming in that are already, high or drunk or in some altered state. So they're really two different issues. I think that what we're seeing now is really great coordination coming from the city and the county, and it's something that I have championed all along, and it continue to try to bring people together. As I hear from different corners of the community wanting to work on issues, my job is always to try to bring them into the same conversation, and certainly bring them into staff, so staff are aware that I'm hearing those different conversations. So that coordination is critical. It is one of the things that we really, again, I think the work that we did on the TAC report helped to define it even more specifically, and we are seeing it play out now as we're trying to address the coronavirus with the unsheltered, that the coordination is really stronger than it's ever been before, with the multiple agencies coming into play.
Ralph asks, in the allocation of resources, what is our highest priority today, today, and then excluding the virus, how would you have answered that?
Well, okay, the highest priority allocation of resources today is first responders, because we're in a crisis. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge is to make sure that we're supporting the first responders, and we can sustain that for some period of time, because we're looking at several months of this crisis, and how do we do that? So coming out of that, I think it's the broad question of how do we recover as an economy, and how do we help individuals recover from their losses? So there's the human suffering side of it, and there's the economic viability side of it as a community. So I think as we go forward, we're going to be looking at those two pieces, and how do those relate to our ongoing conversations about housing availability and affordability, and about climate action plan and transportation and homeless. I mean, those are all going to be knitted together now. I think it's potentially a really dynamic and interesting conversation, but everybody's not going to get everything they want.
Absolutely. So that's all the questions I have in the chat at the moment. So I guess if we're going to wrap it up, a couple of things. I'll let you sort of have final thoughts at the end, but why are you the right candidate for the business community?
I appreciate the business community. I have really, even before taking office and when I worked at Shelter Care, appreciated that the kind of work that Shelter Care did was supported by the business community, and that you're sort of essential not only to our viability, our economic sustainability as a community, but you're actually contributing to our all of our kind of social issues and challenges. So I came into office with that perspective, and I've carried that perspective, which is that we need for the business community to be able to function well, to thrive, in order for us as a community to be able to pay for the services and the infrastructure that we need as a community. We have to have a healthy business community. And so I think that perspective aligns. And I look forward to working with all aspects of the business community going forward.
Thank you. We did have one more question pop in. Are there any silver linings related to the delay of the World Games potentially to 2022? I don't think it's officially announced yet that would be the outcome of the Olympics being postponed. But we know that there was it's going to be a huge economic hit on our community on top of everything else. But do you see any silver linings there?
I do. I think given that we are taking a huge economic hit across the board, I mean, related to the games, but in general, we're taking a huge economic hit, and we need time to invest in our recovery as a community. And so I think that if the games come here a year later, that gives us an extra year to recover and invest. And I think that timing may help us because we'll be in better shape.
Great. All right. Any final comments, thoughts on things that we didn't touch on this morning?
I think that was as I would have expected, a very robust and detailed and challenging set of questions. And I appreciate all of you because you actually keep me on my toes here, really making sure that I understand your perspectives and think through all the questions that face us. So I appreciate all of you coming together at this time under these circumstances. I appreciate your insights into the work we're doing. I look forward to working with you, and I'm eager to do that work for another 4 years. I think we can come through this stronger, better, and want to do that work very much with your priorities and insights in mind. So thank you very much for really just taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, of course. So for the benefit of folks listening in, we, as the chamber, we prioritize making sure that we're in close connection with our elected officials and that we're doing the best that we can to communicate the values of the business community and the priorities that we see and think that they should be addressing. And we have a couple members of our Government Affairs Council that meets regularly with Mayor Vinnis, just to keep her apprised of the issues that we care about and the things that we're talking about. And so I appreciate the fact that you have always answered the call and have sat down with those folks. You and I have also talked about, if you are to be elected for 4 more years, some of the ways that we can continue to improve the communication between the business community and you in this office. And you've graciously agreed to sit down on a regular basis with chamber members as we kind of think about how to better connect business leaders with our elected officials as well. So I appreciate and always have your willingness to pick up the phone and to have hard conversations and to be responsive. And I know that you and I have talked about your desire to continue and hopefully do that in a more robust way going forward if you're given a chance.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. And those of you who want to know more, I do have a town hall at 5:15 on Facebook, Re-elect Mayor Lucy Vinnis, so you can check in again.
There we go. Thank you, everybody, for signing on this morning and for your thoughtful questions. We really appreciate it. This webinar will be, it is recorded, so we'll post this. So if folks did not get a chance to sign in, we can share that and they can listen in as well. So appreciate your time this morning, Mayor Vinnis, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.